Okay, um, we are going to start, even though there will be people joining us. I think the weather has many people outside enjoying it. So welcome everyone, and thank you for those of you who are here today. We hope that this is going to be our last meeting on Zoom, and that our plan is to return to in-person meetings for the remainder of the semester. Before we begin with our agenda items, I would like to acknowledge the passing of one of our esteemed colleagues. Walter Dellinger died yesterday, a faculty member in the law school, who was in the law school for over 40 years. I am sure that many of you are aware of his accomplishments beyond Duke and have likely read the tributes made in his honor since the announcement of his death yesterday. His accomplishments are far too numerous to enumerate here, and his service to our country on a number of legal fronts will serve generations to come. On behalf of the Duke faculty, I offer our condolences to his family and acknowledge his service and many accomplishments. In terms of our agenda today, though we only have 2 items, ECAC and I wanted to provide ample time for Q&A following both of these presentations. So we intend to go to 5 o'clock today. Our hope is that this will allow plenty of time for your questions after each presentation. So we're going to begin with the approval of the minutes from our last meeting from January 20th. The minutes were posted online with our agenda. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none and seeing no hands, because we are on Zoom, we will consider the minutes approved. Next, we're going to turn to the first agenda item for today. And this is a presentation regarding a proposal to establish a university-wide ombuds office that would serve not only the faculty and students, but for the first time, offer the ombuds as a resource to staff at Duke. Former academic chair Carrie Haney and I were part of conversations and meetings that were held over the last few months that included our presenters today, the provost, those in student affairs administration, the vice provost for faculty advancement, the vice provost or the vice president, excuse me, for OIE, and the vice dean for the faculty in the School of Medicine, in addition to several others. This proposal has also had feedback from our 2 current ombuds, Laura Svetke in the School of Medicine and Paul Manos from Biology. ECAC also considered the proposal, and we were pleased that many of the recommendations that are included flow directly from the work of the Academic Council's Diversity Task Force. This task force that was established in 2014 conducted the bulk of its work over 2014 and 2015, contained a subcommittee which expressly examined the role of the ombuds. Those recommendations, which were from the task force subcommittee 3, were reviewed by Executive Vice President Daniel Ennis and Associate General Counsel Neera Skirke, and considered as part of the proposal you will hear more about today. And with that, I'm going to turn the screen over to Daniel and Neera to discuss the proposal and to answer your questions. Daniel?
Great, thanks, Erica. Wendy will be putting up the presentation. While she does that, I just want to thank Erica and ECAC. We've had now several conversations about this proposal, and their guidance to me has been, and to the team, been incredibly helpful. So thank you. Wendy, we'll go to the next page if you don't mind. She's stuck. Hold on a second.
Can you all see that?
You can see the first page. You might want to put it in presenter view if it's easier. This is why we will be returning in person in March. Click.
This view will be fine if that's what
Yeah.
we need to do, Wendy.
Sorry, y'all, it's not moving. I'm going to try
Yep.
again. Keep talking. I'll bring it down and come back up.
Okay. I can do the overview here without the slides. So this topic actually came to me, and the reason I sort of took the point was Kim Hewitt and conversations with staff through the anti-racism process had flagged that the ombuds capability not being available to staff felt unfair, inequitable across our community. And so when I heard that feedback coming in, I offered to take up the question with Kyle and many others. And you'll see the list of folks, and Erica described it. As we went through the process, we realized, of course, that the diversity task force of the academic council had spent a lot of time on this topic and had diagnosed similar questions about how the ombuds was serving our faculty as well as serving our students. And so we have dug into those recommendations that came from the diversity task force. And you saw those in the materials that Erica shared with you. And the big kind of overarching punchline is that we believe that the diagnostic work done by the diversity task force was completely aligned with the work we had done as we considered the structure of this function. And in large part, we are accepting of the recommendations that came out of the diversity task force. And so we'll talk you through those just to remind you of that work and what that group came up with. But that is the overarching kind of message, is that we think that that group understood and diagnosed important issues the same that we were worrying as we were looking at the function. And that's in large part the proposal that we're putting forward to you today for your engagement and discussion. So this page just shows you the folks that have been involved. As Erica said, we also consulted with the current ombuds and also have had conversations with prior ombuds to inform this proposal. And I just want to express a huge debt of gratitude to Neera, who's been really driving a lot of this work in support of this entire team. So Wendy, we can go forward one. So the topics today are why now? Why are we bringing this forward? What are we proposing in terms of reconstituting the function? A reminder of the sort of how the official the IOA defines the ombuds function. I think that's quite important, and in truth, that informed a lot of what and it drove the task force on diversity's recommendations. And then as we were going through this process, ECAC asked us to create a flow chart just for faculty to understand, okay, if you have a differently constituted ombuds function, what are the total resources available to faculty as they navigate complicated issues in their departments in any form. And so we'll just talk you through, remind you of that sort of resource map. Thanks, Wendy. So just as a reminder, the findings of the Academic Council Task Force on Diversity were incredibly informative, and it's just worth a quick skim through these. The first point is just a point about clarity of the role and responsibility and confusion amongst our community. The second point is just emphasizing the importance of the formal training associated with fulfilling the responsibilities of an ombud. And that's where, in particular, it's important to reference the the International Ombuds Association guidelines, and we'll have a couple slides that just speak to some of that. Third is just the systems in support of this function. There was a view that it was maybe more informal than it should be as a very important service and support mechanism for our faculty. And so there was guidance identified by DTF about how that could be professionalized. And then the fourth finding was a question of sort of just diversity of options for faculty to consider for support. Those were the high level findings. There was a lot more in terms of those reports, if you go back to them, that informed that summary list. Thanks, Wendy. In addition, and this is actually where this group came into this, as I noted, we came at this actually first from the view of our staff expressing concerns about lack of access. Through that process, as we discussed the role, talked to the current ombuds, kind of evaluated the history and the performance of this function, I think there's a uniform view that lack of clarity and confusion about role and responsibility has been a challenge for this function. And I think the faculty ombuds themselves would be the first to describe how that's been complicated for them to navigate. And then the third is when you have clarity, confusion about role and responsibility, in a role as sensitive as this, you obviously have the potential to create risk for the institution in the conduct of the function. Next slide, Wendy. So just pulling, this is a much tighter summary of the recommendations that came from the Diversity Task Force that Erica and Sandra sent you. But the messages were clarify the role, bring more understanding about the function. And there they described best practices of other universities that we would strongly agree with. Consolidate the function into a sort of centralized capability that would lend itself to some more professionalism, system building, reinforcement, and I'll talk about that more in a second. And the fourth point just reinforces that, building more systems around this function. Next slide. So this is what we are proposing to you all, and really looking forward to your feedback. The first is that we would go ahead and create a professional and dedicated ombuds office that will serve all faculty, students, and staff at the university. We spent a fair bit of time with the health system, and they will not be moving forward at this point with building out this function. It's just different and more complicated than a healthcare delivery environment. We would propose to recruit 2 ombuds. One would be dedicated to staff and faculty, a second, which the recruitment is already underway and is being conducted as if this proposal were moving forward, meaning the job description talks about being part of a central ombuds function. So there's a student ombud proposed, and there's 3 finalists in that process. And it's really interesting to see the profiles of those finalists. They're outstanding backgrounds as ombuds, as well as deep experience in student affairs connected functions. Third recommendation is that and this is something ECAC felt strongly about and was recommended by the Diversity Task Force, that we assure that faculty and other constituents of the office can find a connection point in that office that feels comfortable, feels accessible. And so for the moment, we think that the faculty and student ombud can support and reinforce each other. And but if we find that that this proposal needs more by way of an addition of ombuds, we're prepared to do that. And we will provide the appropriate administrative support so that the systems can be built, et cetera. And then the regular reporting, this was quite important through the recommendations of the Diversity Task Force, that the ombuds has the great benefit and privilege of being made aware of complicated and potentially challenging areas around the university, and that those learnings on a de-identified, completely anonymous, confidential basis should be synthesized to inform academic council, ECAC, and university leadership. And so that's part of the proposal. And then to the extent there's comfort with moving forward, or when there is, or if there is, the ECAG's thought, and we share this, is that it may require amendments to Appendix N of the faculty handbook. So we would come back to you at that point. Next slide, Wendy. Just as a reminder, in this, the Diversity Task Force really leaned on this. The International Ombudsman Association is very clear about the role, and its independence is vital. Its responsibilities as relates to neutrality is vital in its effectiveness, and confidentiality. Wendy, next slide. So that's the code of ethics, and then there's a standard of practice, and basically reinforces the same messages in terms of independence, that the Ombud does not become an advocate, and further elaboration. Trina, I'll just finish this next slide and then come back to you. I see your hand. And this is just a little bit of the flow chart that ECAC thought would be helpful for our faculty to see, which is to say, the Ombud is a vital resource, but will be fulfilling its function in a different way than it has historically, in alignment with those recommendations and best practice as we understand it from other institutions. But there are other avenues by which faculty can and hopefully would seek support outside of their schools, outside of the classic and traditional departmental and school faculty affairs structures. And so Abbas has been intimately involved in this proposal and understands his office plays a vital role. There's the anonymous capability through the Speak Up line. And then obviously there's much more formal mechanisms below in terms of OIE and internal audit, and even the police, in worst case scenarios, obviously. So that's the summary, and I'm happy to take questions and engage. Sorry for the delay in getting through that.
Thank you, Daniel. I will, if you're comfortable fielding questions, I will let you do that. If not, I can also help. But as you said, Trina, I will let you ask the first question and acknowledge that you are one of the co-chairs of the Diversity Task Force. So thank you for your work.
Wendy, you can take the slides down so we can see each other. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I'm Trina Jones from the law school. And as Erica just said, I co-chaired the Diversity Task Force with Nan Jokers in 2014 and 2015. And after that, there was a year-long implementation committee that Sally constituted that also considered this role. And then in 2017 and 2018, while I was on ECAC with Emily Klein, we spent quite a bit of time looking at Appendix N and the faculty ombud's position. So there's been many years of research that has gone into this particular position. I'm really curious, and Daniel, thank you for your excellent overview. I'm very excited by the fact that the university is going to create an ombud's office, which is something that we had recommended at the time. I think it's similar, and it may be similar in structure to what UNC already has in place and has had in place for some time. I'm a little curious about the effects of this new office on the faculty ombud's position, which is a position that we spent quite a bit of time considering. In the DTF recommendations, we actually asked for 2 faculty ombuds, right? Because of the varying demographics among the faculty, we thought that it would be important for faculty to be able to access 2 different individuals, because we learned that there was some hesitation among some subgroups of faculty in terms of approaching one ombuds because of that person's demographic characteristics or their reputation. And so it looks like this proposal might actually decrease that even further if there's going to be one ombuds that will be shared by faculty and staff. And I also just build upon that observation. This is based upon my anecdotal exchanges with my colleague, Tom Metzlaw, who was the past ombuds before Paul assumed the position. And to be sure, he was taking cases from the medical center, but he said that there was quite a bit of work, right, involved in just servicing faculty, especially when you put in the health system. So I'm really curious about this shared responsibility of one person for both staff, right, who have overlapping concerns with faculty, but also their unique sets of concerns and faculty. So that's my first question. The second question relates to Appendix N. We spent a year incorporating all of the recommendations that were made by the Diversity Task Force into Appendix N to address all of the issues that you had on your bullet. What is the role of on your bullets, the role of the ombuds? What sorts of training do we expect an ombuds to have? What sorts of documentation do we need to make sure that there's accountability, and how the ombuds fits with other entities on campus? So I guess my question is, what further revisions to Appendix N do you anticipate? Because the faculty carefully considered those revisions in 2017 and 2018. We ran them by the General Counsel's office, Pam Bernard, Richard Riedel in the President's office, and the Academic Council, after a number of conversations, approved them. So I think we've done the heavy lifting with regard to the ombuds, faculty ombuds. So what do you anticipate doing with regard to this position as we move forward in the future? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Trina. Thanks for your leadership. That report was incredibly well done and important, and quite instructive for a newcomer to the institution. So thank you. So I think the first thing to say about capacity, recognizing the recommendations from Diversity Task Force, is that there is a re-envisioning of the role. And in terms of understanding how the ombuds function is more classically delivered and executed on when you spend time connected to the guidance created by the IOA, and when you spend time with what transpires at peers, which is that, and when you compare it to what has been done historically. Historically, the ombud has played a very active role. I mean, to the point of case management, active mediation, intermediation. That is not the norm for what an ombuds is expected to do, or is chartered to do under the IOA. And so a little bit as it relates to the question of what's the right staffing, we just had the view, it needs to we need to find this professional dedicated ombud and let that person figure out in the more traditional delivery of ombud services what will make the most sense for this office. So we just didn't want to prejudge it pending the process of discovery and a person coming in to fulfill the function. When we talk about the student ombuds, we consider this to be an office that would be able to be reinforcing of each other, the two professionals, the faculty and staff ombud and the student ombud. And we would expect that they could be in the sort of client service mode across the population and the community, where and how that could be helpful and appropriate. So it's not, we want the office to have the ability to just be able to reinforce and provide some redundancy. So, in some respects, we're starting with at least two. By the way, I should make this clear, there is a student ombud in the School of Medicine which we will be working with the net chart into the structure over time. That's a function that's been in existence and is well respected. So we're just working with that person. So I think that's the proposal. ECAG was very clear that, and we understand the commitment, the interest in having two faculty and staff ombuds, and we're prepared to appoint two. but we're just letting the new ombud, the leader of this office kind of come in and get it up and running and make recommendations to us on how best to fulfill the function as that person gets up to speed. So nothing's off the table. We're just taking it a step at a time here with regards to structure and capacity. I will, because I don't have the history on Appendix N in terms of what you described, Trina, in that process. But as we reviewed it relative to what we are proposing here, we definitely were of the view that there were amendments needed. So Neera, I don't know if you want to jump in here to respond to that question specifically.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Trina. You're right that the spirit of the DTF recommendations are pretty much already captured in Appendix N. I started to look at it. I think there'd just be technical corrections, like instead of saying faculty ombuds, to say university ombuds, and to reflect the appointment not being part-time or part of someone else's portfolio, but to be dedicated to someone who does this work full-time. I also think that there's just a few like minor changes about confidentiality to make it more robust. There have been some changes to the Clery handbook that would actually allow this to be entirely confidential. This role would not have to be a campus security authority under the Clery Act. That change must have occurred since Appendix N was last updated. So if anything, I think they're minor, but just to be consistent with how this new office is going to be structured, those are the changes I think that we had in mind.
And yeah, that is my understanding too, and having looked at Appendix N, that it is not a rewrite in any way. Carrie.
Thank you, Erica. Carrie Haney, Political Science and African American Studies. As Daniel and Erica indicated, I sat on this committee. This was happening during the transition from my time as ending my term and Erica beginning hers as chair. And each had discussed this during my time as well. There's a bit of background I think is important to note here. In one of these meetings we had, Sandra Walton is owed a great deal of gratitude. Sandra went and dug out the minutes of a faculty meeting, an academic council meeting 40 years ago, in which the Ombuds Office was created in that meeting, or at least recommended and come out of that meeting. And what we discovered in reading the minutes is that what the faculty wanted and created was misnamed as ombuds, or at least, or maybe what an ombuds does has changed since that time. If you look at those minutes, is not in compliance with what the international organization guidelines are about an ombuds. And Trina, this may respond to your question about advocacy, right? So it becomes less important to have the diversity that we talked about on that task force. If you look at the role of the ombuds, it's not to advocate and get involved in disputes, it's to direct traffic as to where you go. And so that may make it less important to have that diversity if you think of it, not the role that the ombuds had been planned to date, right? Where they did do some advocacy and people wanted to say things. As I understand what the rules require an ombuds to do is to stay neutral and just make you aware of what resources are available to you and then direct you to those resources. So that background was important, that the faculty wanted something, voted for something, called it, maybe misnamed it as an ombuds. Now, there's still a question about whether we want a faculty advocate, which would be separate from this proposal, that there be someone that faculty can turn to as an advocate in some capacity. But it's certainly like the ombuds given the international guidelines.
Thank you, Carrie. That is very helpful background. Harvey?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, my question follows directly on Carrie's. Having sat through some part of that history, actually a fair amount, it seems to me, and my question was going to be, well, what is it that the Ombuds has been doing for the past few years? Because when at the time of the change in the actual person who was the Ombuds, as I recall, a number of things were added into that role, some of them having to do with training and a variety of other things. But I'm curious to know what it is you're thinking the ombuds won't do more specifically than what they are doing now. Because my recollection is similar to Carrie's, that at the beginning, this was supposed to be a person who could hear out the faculty member who might have a concern or even a dispute or whatever, and help advise them on what they could do. And that's kind of an advocacy role. And if it's not going to be that, it's not clear to me what it will be. The other thing that relates to that is when you showed that organizational chart and the things down at the bottom, the thing that wasn't there, which I think has often been the next step from the ombuds, is the faculty hearing committee. Because when I was on the faculty hearing committee, virtually every person that reached that level had been to the ombuds. And whatever it was that they were seeking couldn't be solved there. There were other things that were solved, but those couldn't get solved. And so off they came to the faculty hearing committee. And so I would have thought that would be in that resources list if you're going to have one. Anyway, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Oh, I'm Harvey Cohen, Medical Sciences, by the way, Clinical Sciences.
Thanks, Harvey. I think the biggest difference in terms of what I've understood of how the function has been delivered really relates to the role as mediator. And so it's one thing to be of counsel and to support and advise in that confidential, neutral setting. But in order to fulfill your responsibilities with regards to neutrality, that really limits any sense of actually getting in, in sort of the sense of case management and going and intermediating discussions and trying to proactively bring the ombuds hat, solve the problem. And the way I think about it is, as an ombud, the other side of that negotiation could be your client tomorrow. And you have a responsibility to support that member of our community in the same neutral, confidential way in that moment of becoming a part of mediation conflicts with what the Ombuds Association, the practice of the ombud role and responsibility is. So it's a more delimited role than I think has been the practice as I've understood it.
If I could just add, mediation is by nature a neutral process, is it not?
Yeah, I think the question is the way in which mediation gets structured and supported, and I think the view in terms of the study of the ombuds function and the expectations is that isn't that sort of traditional role of the ombuds in terms of the role it plays. I mean, mediation is neutral, and there's mediation capability and services to be considered, but it's that the ombud isn't fulfilling that responsibility or that playing that role.
Nan?
Hey, Nan Jokers, Pratt School of Engineering. Great to see everybody here. And thank you, Dennis, for the Daniel, for the conversation. Sorry, concatenated your two names. I have a few questions. First of all, there was a comment in there that I didn't quite understand about the health system. Right now, my understanding is the ombuds does accept inquiries and does help faculty from the health system. And so I'd be concerned about leaving them just out of it. The second question I have is that the ombuds in the past has often been a faculty member or a former faculty member. And so they bring a perspective of lived experience of a faculty member, which I think is important to the role. And if the ombuds will serve, and I think it's great to have a staff ombuds, by the way, if the new envisioning of the ombuds will satisfy both faculty and staff concerns, it might be wise to have someone who has lived experience associated with a staff position as well. Working with staff and faculty in the position I have now, I will say that the concerns can be quite different. And I will echo some of the previous comments. I do think, and I once again, from experience, feel that someone who is approachable and might have a similar lived experience to those who have concerns, it simply is easier to go to that person and discuss what can be very painful experiences in confidence. And the last thing I'd like to ask about, sorry for having so many questions, is that what is the reporting structure? Because the independence of the ombuds is very important. And I saw a skinny arrow going to OFA. In the past, the reporting has been, as indicated in your slides, to ECAC and to the president at a very high level. And so I was wondering about that skinny arrow to OFA and what the meaning of that was. Thank you so much for your attention to the ombuds. It's really important, and thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Starting with the last question, reporting relationship, that it was just meant to say that was more that the ombuds would be refer over to faculty advancement as appropriate. It wasn't meant to suggest reporting relationship. The proposal would have the report be to the president as a organizational matter, but then have significant responsibilities for reporting to academic council, ECAC, and university leadership in that anonymized, de-identified way with regards to issues of concern that need to be addressed. Sort of more systemic issues that they are identifying for our, the benefit of informing leadership, decision-making, and action. The health system, just to be clear, this encompasses our School of Medicine faculty, our School of Medicine trainees, doctoral students. This is not excluding that. So when I was talking about Duke University Health System, I'm talking about employees of the health system, nursing staff, part of the clinical delivery mechanism, but not in any way meant to exclude faculty or students or staff of the School of Medicine or School of Nursing. They would still be connected to this capacity. The lived experience, two different questions you had. One, which we feel strongly about, is the connection to the academy and the sense of understanding what a faculty member's life is like, and some of the asymmetrical power relationships and all this, which is so much of where an ombud is going to play a role. So there will be a very high premium on that experience. I think when we honestly actively debated this in terms of considering a job description, should it be geared exclusively to faculty members who now make their vocation as ombuds, or would we consider, professional ombuds who've grown up in the academy, say, or in similar settings? And we wanted to open it up more, but recognize the importance of the ability to connect, to understand the nature of faculty life and, the complexities of faculty life. So it will be a process, and we will have, faculty through ECAC intensely involved in the search. The lived experience point is really an important point, and it goes back to Trina's point, which is, what I was trying to say is we're not prejudging the structure of the office. So it could be that the person who comes in to build this and lead this function will think, I need a staff-focused ombud, I need another faculty ombud. And what we said to ECAC is we're going to be supportive and invest at their direction. So I do believe that the nature of the services that it will deliver are substantially different than what we kind of have seen. So it's just a little hard to predict what the capacity will be, what the case management needs will be, what the lived, to your point, the lived experience needs will be. So it's just leaving it to the new person to fulfill it and be responsive to the concerns being raised by you and others. Hope that's responsive.
So I'm going to take the next two questions, Lee and Josh, and group them, have them both ask their questions, and then have you respond, Daniel, and also Neera. So then we can transition to our next presentation, so we have enough time for Q&A there too.
Thank you, Lee Baker, Cultural Anthropology. My question is sort of on ratios. I mean, if we have something like 5,000 faculty members, we're adding 8 times that, 40,000 staff members. How are we figuring in terms of overall numbers? And I also really think that we need ombuds people that really understand the student life, really understand the faculty life. And then with the staff, there's so many different staff positions. I mean, a clinical person and a cafeteria worker have really different issues. And I just hope that we have the capacity to have an ombuds person that has both expertise, empathy, and just sort of can see it through their eyes. And because I think that's one of the most important aspects of the ombuds.
Hi, Joshua Sokolar, Physics. I just wanted to follow up and maybe emphasize a point that was sort of a subtext in Trina's and Carrie's and Nan's and Harvey's comments, and it's about advocacy. When the DTF was doing its work, we were reimagining what the ombuds position might be in the context of a much broader reimagination of how faculty would pursue complaints or perceptions of unfair treatment. And at that time, there was no such thing as the Office of Faculty Advancement. And we were imagining that that office might serve more of an advocacy role for faculty, so that some of the things that our current ombuds does that look more like advocacy would have a home in another office. And I would just like to urge everybody involved here to think about how that office can play that role well, in addition to all the other things that it is doing.
Okay, I can't not let, oh my goodness. Okay, we have lots of with this. Daniel, do you want to respond to any of this? Otherwise, we have Harvey, Sally, and Jolie, and then we're going to stop.
You know, Erica, I just actually have a comment in response to Josh's comment, if Daniel doesn't mind me jumping in with it. So, Josh, you're absolutely right that a piece of the faculty advocacy sort of goal really lives in that Office of Faculty Advancement. And just one thing I'll say about it, I know that Abbas is putting together information for ECACT here. I think a lot of this goes on, but it's sort of under the radar, and a lot of it is confidential. A lot of it is, faculty coming to consult with Abbas, working directly with deans, working directly with chairs, et cetera. And I think a lot of that activity has been going on under the auspices of the Office of Faculty Advancement, and a lot of it is not captured. So, just captured visibly to the community. So I think we have to think about exactly what is being done and then analyze if there's still any gap there, and then place it appropriately, not within the ombuds role.
Thanks, Sally. Okay, so Jolie, since you haven't asked a question or made a comment.
It's just a very quick one, which is, and maybe this is Trinity specific, but with regard to the ombuds and staff considerations, which I think it's actually fantastic, but what this would be vis-a-vis any role that the HR office would play, which also seems to have some folks who try to adjudicate conflicts for staff. That's all. Thank you.
Harvey, do you want the last word? And then I'll let Daniel.
It's the last word, but I just wanted to point out that a few years ago, it was decided that because the issues for School of Medicine faculty, at least, were often so different than the rest of the faculty, many who do clinical and research and education, that it was advised that a separate ombuds be set up. And in 2019, that was done. And there is a School of Medicine faculty ombuds, in addition to a School of Medicine student ombuds. So I'm assuming that people from the School of Medicine now are going to that ombuds.
Yep, that's right. I mean, we have 2 part-time faculty fulfilling the responsibilities, School of Medicine side and campus side. And this relates, I think, to Lee's question about capacity. I took 2 different questions. One was just ratios and kind of case management and making sure this is responsive to our community, but then the lived experience point. And you know, we are building out full-time capacity here as opposed to part-time. We're proposing anyways, that these are folks who, this is what they do for a living. And so we hope that adds capacity, and we have said, meaning, you know, compared to where we are today, actually, that actually is an increment to the existing capacity against the volumes you're describing in terms of case, ratios. But we're just very clear about being flexible and responsive on both dimensions, that the proposal would be to give the leader the room to assure responsiveness to lived experience and diverse backgrounds and experiences that would resonate to members of our community, but also to assure that populations are served. I do think, Neera, it might be just good for you to describe the UNC, which has obviously a very large population of faculty, students, and staff, and how they staff their office as just a comparator.
Sure. Before I came to Duke, I was at UNC, and we had 1 full-time ombuds person and a 2nd part-time ombuds person. And that individual, he served the whole university. He was available to faculty, staff, and students. And his name was Wayne Blair. He's a professional ombuds, and he was, I think, accessible to leadership, to faculty, to department chairs. He's worked closely with department chairs, but also housekeepers. We had a huge Burmese housekeeper population, and he was able to connect with them. So I think, this role, I've seen it done with the right person who has the right mindset and approachability. He was able to serve the entire university community. He did have a 2nd person who was a faculty member out of the School of Government who helped part-time for a while. But they had an excellent team. And the office is now since turned over, but I have seen it work. And I think the key for this to be successful is to find the right person for Duke, who knows how to connect with our community. And I think one person could be an accessible and approachable resource for everyone.
Thanks, Neera. And I would just say to the HR question, we need the same flow chart for our staff about where the ombuds role fits vis-a-vis the HR resources. And we need the same thing for students. We were obviously focused on our faculty, that in the context of the changes that are being proposed here for our faculty, but we absolutely need to detail that in a similar way. And I also, Josh, appreciate your feedback on this, and that advocacy role. What we recognize in bringing this proposal, what we're very worried about is a sense of faculty losing a place where they've been benefited from some advocacy and wanting to address that. And I think Sally and Abbas are very attentive to that concern and question in the context of the Office of Faculty Advancement, not to mention all the faculty affairs capability that exists in schools and departments as well.
Okay, with that, I'm going to thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Neera, for bringing this proposal to Academic Council for a revised Ombuds office. I want to thank everyone for these very helpful, useful, insightful comments that I hope, Daniel and Neera, that you'll be able to use in moving forward, and the recognition that, on the part of the faculty for the importance of having a very robust ombuds office at Duke. So I see this conversation, ongoing with taking into account much of this feedback that we received today. So thank you, everyone. Now we're going to turn to our last presentation, which relates to the outcomes from the 2030 working groups, or the 2030 working group. This is a group which was convened by Provost Kornbluth roughly a year ago or so. And some of you on this meeting have been members of one of the various subcommittees that were part of the working group meetings and conversations. And I am just going to let Provost Kornbluth, Sally, introduce the work that has been ongoing and some of the preliminary outcomes.
Great, thanks very much, Erica. And Laura Bryn will be running the slides for me here. So as Erica just said, I've been asked to share an update with you on the work of the 2030 team. So if you can remember all the way back to April 2020, you may recall that Vince put 2 advisory groups into place. One was called Team 2021, that was focused on navigating the pandemic. And, you know, I think they did a great job. And then, and hopefully we're tailing off here. The second was Strategy Team 2030 that really had 2 missions. One was to deal with longstanding financial issues and to identify cost savings to help the university weather financial effects of the pandemic. I will not be detailing those today. I believe many of you have encountered those changes locally, and you're well familiar with the maneuvers we took, some of which we were able to reverse in order to weather that storm. But the second prong of the 2030 effort was much more aspirational. So the real question we asked ourselves was, where do we want Duke to be in 2030? And what do we want our university to look like? And how do we get there with action starting right now? So what was the process and who participated? So in the first phase of the work, there were really 2 committees. One was all of the deans, me, Tolman Trask, who was then in the job Daniel now holds, Mike Schoenfeld and Gene Washington, as well as Carrie Haney, who was then academic council chair, and Peter Fever, who chaired a parallel faculty committee shown here, whose ideas were funneled into the dean's discussion, which, as I mentioned, also included Peter and Carrie. So the overall effort was co-chaired by me and Noah Pickus, who is here today, but is now the chief academic officer at Minerva, but he's here, he can hopefully help me field some questions. So, you know, we spent considerable time on understanding the broader landscape of higher education, as well as formulating some Duke-specific concerns and broader ideas. We then moved to a more focused stage, and I'm sorry if this is a little hard to read, but with working groups that partially overlap with the first group, with a number of faculty and administrative additions. These groups focused on the topics shown here: new modes of research collaboration, renewing a Duke education, reimagining shared governance, and refreshing financial structures. So what did these groups do? So the 2030 process was never meant to be a strategic planning process. As you know, Duke continues to operate under 2 strategic plans. One is called Together Duke on the campus side, and one is called Advancing Duke Health, which is on the Duke Health side. There's also an overarching presidential strategic framework towards our 2nd century. So what was 2030? It's really been a process of engaging deeply with the changing landscape of higher education to identify opportunities to build our core identity, refine and invest in areas that were strong, address problems that put us at a competitive disadvantage, and craft a vision for what might be distinctive about Duke by 2030. So, you know, the group discussed, and, you know, you've got a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions, but one thing we determined rather early on in the process is that we're already doing many of the things that will distinguish the Duke of 2030 in both the undergraduate education and research realms. And we also concluded that our greatest opportunity is in leaning into the things that have the most potential to make Duke distinctive, as the place where faculty want to conduct high impact scholarship and where students know that they'll have a truly transformative educational experience. And, you know, although there's support for certain research areas that I've spoken about previously in many campus venues, for instance, climate change, areas designated in the Duke Science and Technology funding, the 2030 group really had no appetite for kind of Manhattan Project style top-down focusing of our research on 1 or 2 research areas. We just have too many faculty doing trailblazing research, and we want to continue to encourage that. So given our time constraints, I can only touch on some of the key recommendations today. I'm very happy to provide a high-level review of the working group's recommendations, and the report will be available. We can make the whole report available to those who are interested through the Academic Council. So let's talk then about education a little bit. So the education realm that the committee focused primarily on was undergraduate education. And, you know, the university takes a far more decentralized approach to graduate and professional education. Duke offers nearly 150 graduate or professional degree programs, and each one of those is governed in large measure by the faculty, as you know, within each unit or school offering the program. So much of this lies within the domain of the schools and the departments. Plus, it would be very, very difficult to make one-size-fits-all recommendations in this space. So the 2030 Education Working Group was charged really with attuning Duke's undergraduate educational model to three things: the changing needs of young adults, the evolving ecology of the residential and online education, and competitive pressures among peers to deliver the highest quality of education. You know, we all want our students to experience a powerful and coherent set of learning opportunities that allow them to discover their deepest purposes. So how do we do this? There were really three levers of change in support of the vision. The first was to make a more coherent and powerful learning journey possible with a special focus on more firmly building research into our student experience, leveraging the strengths of an R1 university. You know, this is what distinguishes Duke from a Williams, an Amherst, a Wesleyan. You know, we have a big research operation and we want our students to participate. The second was attracting and retaining top faculty teachers by incentivizing innovative pedagogy and high-touch teaching and mentoring. And the last was reimagining structures and systems to enhance flexibility and integration. So what does that actually mean? Let's look a little more closely. So, you know, undergraduates arrive at Duke. We hope they want to grow intellectually and personally, but, you know, one of the reasons they've gotten here is because they do so well at everything, and many experience pressures that lead to like complete risk aversion and sort of a checklist approach to learning. You know, I've done one of these and two of these. Some of our students are doing too much. Some of them are doing it too quickly. Some of it never synthesize it. So, you know, it's a little incoherent and it leaves the total experience less than it could have been. So we want to create a learning experience where all of our students have opportunity to engage in deep moments of discovery and to integrate their curricular and their co-curricular experiences. So, you know, there really should be some sort of overarching sequence of learning. It doesn't mean it's identical for every student, but we want in the first year to have some sort of welcoming invitation to deep inquiry and discovery, such as students really experience through the Focus program. As well, we're starting these University 101 courses that introduce essential aspects of Duke learning to as many students as possible. And the first one on race under the direction of Carrie Haney has been quite successful. In the second or third year, we want some kind of immersive and intellectually disruptive learning experience that's really connected to scholarly engagement. You know, we have the Marine Lab, we have Duke Immerse, we have Data Plus, we have Past Connections. We have a lot of offerings that sort of sit around the curriculum. The question is, how do we really integrate them? And then we really want every senior to have some kind of culminating experience or integrative capstone. Now, I'm not saying every student should do an honors thesis. It could be an honors thesis, it could be a capstone project, it could be a capstone course, just some way to actually draw together their whole educational experiences. Now, I should say that, you know, we are now launching a new effort to design a new undergraduate curriculum for Duke. This is a university committee that's going to be chaired by Scott Hutel. These recommendations are meant really just to inform their thinking, but it's, you know, it also lays in the departments as well in terms of how they think about their majors, et cetera. The second lever of change the working group identified is really the critical role of faculty engagement in the undergraduate educational experience. So, you know, it's a little difficult to incentivize teaching excellence, and some of our professional school faculty really like teaching undergraduates, but find it fiscally and administratively difficult to teach or mentor undergraduate students. So the group set out to identify sustainable structures and pedagogical tools from faculty for all schools to deepen their engagement with undergraduates. So we want to think, and this is a big endeavor, you know, this is not an immediate thing. We want to support more high-touch learning, mentoring, and research by reimagining contracts, compensations, and requirements for promotion across employment ranks, divisions, and schools. We also really want to enable deeper collaborations between professional school faculty and students across Duke. So one idea would be to institute some sort of rotating undergraduate teaching designation that would be available. for those who are interested, graduate and professional school faculty, creating a cohort of some sort of cross-university faculty devoted to new forms of teaching and learning. So over the past 2 years, our students, faculty, and staff have all experienced rapid shifts in learning modalities. I mean, you all know this from teaching during the pandemic. We've had altered calendars and schedules, even the places where we live and learn. And so, as we begin to emerge from the chaos of the pandemic, we now have the opportunity to intentionally rethink these systems and structures. So these might include things like imagining new possibilities for the academic calendar that can accommodate different durations of learning experience. For instance, some courses might benefit from deeper, more frequent class time and be offered in 8-week modules within a standard 15-week semester. We could reconsider the academic calendar to make more efficient use of our physical plant. The pandemic has also illuminated the limitations and the possibilities for high quality online and hybrid learning, and the rapidity with which our peers are also experimenting in this domain. So the committee has recommended that we should build on this experience by looking for ways to increase flexibility in completing a Duke undergraduate degree. How do we offer courses in hybrid format more frequently? Should we explore stackable online learning experiences that can also take a Duke education beyond our own campus? This includes, obviously, alumni education. So, all these recommendations take into account Duke's existing strengths and culture as an R1 liberal arts university. And we really want to just set it on a trajectory that will continue upward and establish a more robust culture of innovative and meaningful learning among students and faculty. So we're going to need a bit of an experimental approach in which faculty and students conceive, build, test out the best way to achieve these larger goals. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of heterogeneity across our graduate and professional students programs. We have a master's in divinity, a PhD in physics, a JD in law. These are all quite different in their and distinctive in their intellectual objectives and relationship to career trajectory. But nonetheless, 60% of our students are now either graduate and professional students, and we need to give them attention as well. So even with the more substantial faculty engagement we forecast, the vision we have just shared for undergraduate education will surely depend on heightened participation by graduate and professional students as mentors, as colleagues, and of course, graduate students are also playing a crucial role in our research enterprise. So many of you are familiar, and we don't have time to go into it today, with the RIDE report, Reimagining Doctoral Education. This really involved fostering the development of professional skills through experiential learning opportunities, expanding opportunities for graduate and professional students to connect and engage intellectually across program and school boundaries. So we're going to keep working on that. We are working very hard, and this is critical, I think, for Duke of 2030, to accelerate the diversification of student cohorts in graduate and professional students and invest in greater supports for students from underrepresented groups, as well as international students. And finally, we really need to achieve greater consistency of excellence in advising for master's and PhD students. So there's a lot to think about here, and we can't snap our fingers and make it happen, but those were the kind of overarching ideas in the education space. So if I turn your attention now briefly to the research working group, all of your research paves the way for the critical discoveries that we know from Duke that enhance scholarship, that enhance public understanding, applications of knowledge at home and across the world. And the track record here in our research enterprise allows us to recruit world-class faculty, build strategic partnerships, and really continue to secure the resources that propel new discoveries with impact. So, how do we continue to enjoy a conducive environment for such path-breaking, salient research? So there's a lot of heterogeneity across the research. And again, we're not suggesting particular themes, but where we do have significant comparative advantage is in linking across modes of knowledge creation to create new interdisciplinary research avenues. And the recommendations presented here today will really focus on honing those strengths and leveraging them more effectively. I hasten to add, though, and I know this is always a concern when I talk about strengthening some of the interdisciplinary pathways, I want to ensure that the scholars that work in a strictly disciplinary or solitary mode can be highly successful. And I really do not see these goals as mutually exclusive. So this working group's recommendations are careful to consider the increasingly complicated and rapidly evolving landscape in which research takes place at Duke. Complexity alongside cultural norms and expectations can lead to significant frustrations for faculty, and I've heard them from many of you. It can even derail important research altogether. So what we want to do is develop a holistic system of research supports that will extend Duke's capacity to recruit and retain a world-class faculty, embed those faculty in a thriving research ecosystem, and then celebrate and reward what we value. So there's a lot of ideas here, but let me just talk a little bit about things we want to start now that will get us to where we want to be in 2030. So obviously, recruitment and retention is incredibly important. I remember, a long time ago now, when I was vice dean in the medical school, there was a proposal to essentially have like a second startup. In other words, allow folks who had just gotten tenure to get another startup, which would be a reinvestment in mid-career to allow pursuit of new ideas. And, given what the market has done, I wish we had invested in that as an endowment at the time. But I think it had a really sound basis, which is we know that the transition to the associate professor level can be an inflection point for faculty. Just as people sort of begin to feel liberated in terms of really spreading their intellectual wings, there's a lot more service expectations, there's less guidance and mentoring often. And faculty can find it difficult at this stage. And this can be a big blow to the institution where we've already really invested in their success. So, if someone's just gotten tenure, we ought to want to continue to invest in them. So we'd like to provide mid-career faculty with a range of supports. These are described much more extensively in the report. Some are competitive, some are available to all, to be more expansive and willing to take risks. We think that this approach will stand out, demonstrating Duke's distinctive investment in and commitment to our faculty, and generate the kind of high-risk, high-reward research that can really have transformative impact. I have to say, this is also a great recruiting tool. If you think you're going to get an investment when you get tenure, I think that's a great thing. We also recognize that faculty at all ranks may need significant research investment to pursue promising new areas. So there was a recommendation to create a high-dollar internal grant competition that would be limited, that would go to recently promoted faculty, and then have other grants which were more broadly available. These grants might be applied to purchasing an expensive piece of equipment, allowing a scholar or member of their teams to undertake extensive field work, expand staff support for research project, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, we really want to offer mentoring and coaching in a way that would be available to all regular rank faculty through a mix of one-on-one coaching programs, providing structural support for career planning and development. And, BOSS and the Office of Faculty Advancement is already piloting 2 of these programs that have been enormously successful. And I think that we're going to really want to expand that. The 2030 process also helped us articulate common challenges that you all face in doing your work. So a really big one is the need to develop a centralized data sharing and data access infrastructure that spans the university and the School of Medicine, expanding access to data science resources to all faculty, and ensuring that we have adequate numbers of research staff who support data management and complex efforts. So we need, and that's just in one slice of the university. There are many other infrastructural supports that the group spoke about. We need to develop the right infrastructure and set of resources to support research. And the other thing is we have to change the culture around research administration to one that fosters creativity and partnership with our scholars, in addition to ensuring integrity and compliance. So, we already have a lot of that, but if you haven't met our new VPR, Jenny Lodge, I strongly recommend doing so when you have the opportunity. She's invested in this vision, and we look forward to working with her and her team to bring about this kind of change. This is an example where culture is critical to what we want to achieve. And we know faculty want to be where you can do your work without a huge amount of hassle. And we want to have a structure and culture that allow you to flourish. So over the last quarter century, Duke has established a strong reputation, as I mentioned, for interdisciplinarity. We have to work on the funding mechanisms that include the continued recruitment and retention of interdisciplinary faculty. And the working group recommended a number of approaches across this domain, but I have to say, all of this would require significant fundraising. So stay tuned. There's a lot more related points you can see when we post the 2030 report, things like internal MOUs to lower the barriers, or rather reducing the number of internal MOUs, how we engage with external partners. We have a newly created Office of External Partnership for those of you who are interested in working with industry and other external entities. And then finally, I'll say that the committee wanted Duke to develop new principles to support a more flexible allocation of space. Now, I know from my days doing space allocation in the medical school that space is more valuable to people than money. It's very, very tricky. But if we could really get a much better overall university space plan, this would really help our research enterprise. So finally, let me just say, because I know we want to have some time for questions, the governance group, which was chaired by Don Taylor, also a previous academic council chair, recommended things like looking at all of our committees. Many of you are asked to serve on committees. Some of them are incredibly productive and important for the university, and some of them might be better utilized. So we really need to look at the slate of opportunities. We want to look at revisions to the faculty handbook are coming, because that is a little bit unwieldy, but we also want to think about faculty governance across the board. I mentioned an undergraduate curriculum committee. I think this is a huge step in order to start thinking about what a great curriculum that builds on the next stages after Curriculum 2000 would be. And it will allow us to really take in the needs of all the undergraduate teaching schools. So I'm excited about that. And finally, our next steps will involve figuring out how we're going to finance all of these activities. So philanthropy and external sponsored funding certainly have roles to play. And Daniel and his team are working hard with the 2030 Finance Group to see how we might find further internal resources or reorganize our existing resources. So now I'll take comments, questions. Noah may wish to chime in on some of this. So floor is open, and I'm sorry that was a very quick tour of many people's hours of work, but as I said, you'll be able to read it and discuss it. And there's a lot to sift through with regard to what we would do to implement, which things we'll actually do, which things we have money for, which things we need to raise money for, and also what's near term and what's longer term. So Erica, floor is open.
Terrific. We will start with Shai.
So thank you so much for all the work and energy and time you put into this. This is quite impressive. I don't know if it's the nature of your presentation or the nature of the report itself, but it seems to me to be geared more towards the sciences. That's not surprising.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, and again, this is my experience with Duke, is that it's very generous with monetary resources and very stingy with time. And especially in the humanities, we don't need labs, we need time. And yet Duke has a sabbatical policy for the humanities and qualitative social sciences that is not on par with its peer institutes. It's very difficult to buy time, and some of the mechanisms that other universities have to provide time to the faculty, like an Institute for the Humanities, are actually do not function in the same way at Duke. So I'm wondering whether the committee discussed these issues.
Yeah, and I think honestly, Shai, sorry if I always I guess I more naturally gravitate towards science examples, but rest assured that much conversation was had, about humanities and social sciences, and the committee had strong voices in that realm as well. But I will say the thing I skated through very quickly about reimagining how we do compensation, how we do contracts, how we do, how we arrange our time is a really important component of this. And, not to get out over my skis too much here, because I wouldn't want to be held to this, but I'll just speculate and say, Duke has like 6,000 courses for undergraduates. And when we talk about how we want faculty to spend their time, if we want faculty to be doing more research mentoring, having more time for their scholarship, having time to innovate in pedagogy, maybe we have to think more flexibly about what teaching equivalents are, if you know what I mean. In other words, it's not everybody teaching the same number of courses in a department. It's looking at the faculty flexibly as a workforce that has to think about, you know, all different aspects of faculty life and how they spend your time. So could you imagine there being fewer courses and people spending more time on some of these other activities? We just have to figure out what that looks like. And it's not trivial, don't get me wrong, but I hear you. I think that, you know, the conversation was not all about money. It was really about how we can reconfigure the way we spend our time, the way we have our calendars. And, you know, we're going to have to think about what the next phase of implementation looks like to be able to figure out detailed plans. But this provided a kind of framework for it.
Mina?
Thank you for the presentation. Something that I thought was missing, or at least I wish there was a bigger potential emphasis on it, is teaching spaces. I think that those haven't really improved in the 1 decade that I've been here, and I'd really love to see in the next decade they do. I think doing modern teaching is very difficult in some of our spaces. I think the pandemic has highlighted that a lot, that, I mean, we've had to bring in things called Zoom cards, like this didn't need to be the case, right? But also, I think even more importantly, doing inclusive teaching is difficult in some of these spaces as well. And I would really, and I know that space is very expensive and reconfiguring things are hard, but I think we have some classrooms where sometimes when I visit other universities, I'm thinking, wow, we have a lot more resources at Duke. I would really love to see more of these. And importantly, not just prototypes that are smaller classrooms, but being able to innovate at small scale, but also carry that to our 100-person, 200-person type classes as some of the teaching demands are increasing, like class sizes are increasing. There's this give or take between modern and inclusive approaches and your classroom size. And I'd love spaces that allows us to do better on both of those angles.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with you 100%. Second of all, this did come up in the conversation because of the need to compress the reporting on this. I didn't really say anything about this, but we have definitely been having conversations about how we're going to modernize and upgrade our teaching spaces. I agree with you completely. I don't know, Daniel, do you want to add anything about that?
Just to say, I agree strongly, and we have our work to cut out for us in this regard, in all forms of teaching. So more to come in terms of our fiscal planning.
Yep. Cam.
Thank you. I look forward to reading the details of the report. I'd like to follow up on a question that I asked a number of years ago about this effort, and Tallman answered the question. And it had to do with the structural deficits that Duke University faces in many of our divisions. And I noticed that the first couple of bullet points of the charge for this effort have to do with identifying priorities for financial resources, and then also identifying situations where basically we need to rationalize. So I'm wondering, I've got two questions. Number one, I was told by Tallman, and the council was told, that this effort would deal with the structural deficits. So should we expect that in the financial report that is forthcoming, that we will basically make recommendations to undertake the tough decisions that have to be made to eliminate the structural deficits? And the second part is, when can we expect these recommendations?
Yeah, the structural deficit sort of framing is a little complicated in terms of at what level we're speaking. And what I would say is there is, as a matter of fact, at the university level, that operating performance had deteriorated going into the pandemic. And then obviously there was the serious pullback and dramatic moves made to address that crisis. You know, as I've noted here, and has allowed us to restore benefits and salaries and things. We feel, we definitely feel healthier and stronger. And yet there are, as for all major, elite higher ed, academic medicine intensive institutions, complexity in our financial model. And so I think the report and where that committee, that working group has been focused is how do we build resilience into the financial model? How do we consider alternative revenue sources and be willing to understand values, brand, programmatic trade-offs to be flexible for those opportunities? It seems clear that there's opportunities on cost, but that it's much more likely that we will have to find new sources of revenue and support for mission excellence. So I don't find the structural deficit framing to be particularly constructive. And it also is a factor when you think about deficits. Are you at the university level or at the school level? Within the school, are you talking about the unrestricted problems or the aggregate? And I would generally, and you would see this in what the work will show from that group, that's not the frame within which we will operate in terms of supporting the recommendations, the mission-related recommendations of 2030.
Lee?
Thank you. This is really exciting. And Sally, I really liked your vision of leveraging professional and professional school faculty to teach in the undergraduate space, as well as being a little bit more inclusive with the undergraduate teaching units in the faculty governance or the governance over the curriculum. My question is this really a strategic direction? And by doing so, does it sort of take away from the engineering faculty governance and arts and sciences council, or are they still going to be the people responsible for the curriculum? And then subsequently, I mean, you could think big. Is there going to be a Duke degree opposed to a Trinity degree that encompasses all of the other schools? What happens with Pratt then? Some of those things. And if this is strategic, that's great. What I hope it's not is just sort of undergraduate education creep, that we're just accidentally moving in this direction.
Right. So a couple things. One is, the content of what people are teaching is not moving to some Uber, committee. I think this central committee really was to have the voices of, Sanford and Nicholas in the room, and somewhat Pratt. But again, Pratt really has its own curriculum for a lot of different reasons because of what, engineering and education needs, but also their accreditation and everything else. No, it's more about really leveraging what's unique about Duke to the strength of the education. So, for example, we already have a lot of professional school faculty who participate in Fast Connections, for example, or Duke Engage, et cetera, et cetera. They're obviously wanting to engage in undergraduate interactions and activities, but they've all been decorated around the edges of the curriculum. And so, giving all of our undergraduates a more substantive engagement with these faculty who want to engage and bring different perspectives is really what this is about. It's not, first of all, it's not a homogenization. It's not taking, a Trinity education out of the hands of Trinity. It's really thinking about how all this stuff that's going on can actually be incorporated in a more normative experience for our students. And by the way, allow those faculty who are really enthusiastic about doing this to participate.
Okay, thank you. That was a great answer.
Vince, did you want to make a comment?
Sure, just to follow up on that point. I mean, the vision would be in this network of fabulous Duke researchers and teachers. And I would add, by the way, in our alumni population, we have a lot of resident expertise. How do we mobilize as much of that as we can to serve the needs of each student who comes through the university, as opposed to pocketing them in program, department, school? So that's the vision. Now, the challenge is how to build structures that make that viable and possible. But we have a sort of a mix and match challenge, that we have expertise in some parts of the university, inadequately leveraged really to be mixed with and matched with the needs and interests, not just of students, I would say, of other faculty even, right? So that's the vision, and the challenge is to chart a series of practices, structures that lead us closer to realizing that vision. And I think that we shouldn't overlook our alumni population in that conversation, because they also bring a lot of value already, but we tend to think of them in pretty narrow terms, career paths for students, as opposed to ways that you could animate what we do on the campus. So I just wanted to add that.
Victoria.
I might suggest that Victoria and Jolie both ask their questions and then have you respond, Sally, so we
Sure.
are respectful of everybody's time on a beautiful Thursday.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much for the report. I'm really noticing the mention of the term hybridity and this idea of reaching out. And I'm wondering to what extent this future vision is also about the university without walls, if you want to call it that. Because you're talking right now about the different things we can bring to bear for the current students, but there's also this other thread that seems to be about Duke out in the world, out with the alumni, out with the communities. So can you just say more about what direction we see that the proto strategic plan taking in regard to all of that? Thank you.
Did you want Jolie to go ahead, Jolie?
Yeah, mine is actually maybe a follow-up of my question about the ombudsperson, which is that I think that all of these, I think this is really exciting. None of it's really going to work if we can't have a very strong staff, administrative staff. And it's increasingly difficult for us to compete with all of the new employers that are coming to the area. I've had occasion in the past year or so to be involved in efforts to hire staff, administrative staff in departments I'm affiliated with. We often have only one candidate, and one candidate who's not necessarily overqualified for the job. I've encountered a lot of problems myself with, grant proposals that get tossed out because the staff that are supposed to be doing compliance don't do the compliance review. I mean, we need to have really strong staff if we're going to make this work. I think particularly the interdisciplinarity stuff, all of the administration of that ends up falling on faculty. And in addition to that, there's a lot of policy changes. So the amount of time faculty now spend wrestling with Concur is to just get our receipts submitted. I have 8,000 unanswered emails in my inbox right now, 30 of which showed up while I was on this call. And so I think there's just all of this administrative stuff that's falling on staff. And when I think about our peer institutions, or maybe our aspirational institutions where they really have their faculty doing innovative research, they are giving the kind of staff support that Duke is not giving right now, because we're not offering a salary structure that would attract the kind of staff, professionalized staff that I think we need. And this is with all due respect to the staff we have. I think we have people who work incredibly hard, and many of them are amazing at what they do. But the world around Duke has changed considerably, even in the past 5 years, and I feel like we haven't quite kept up.
So 100% agree with that. There has been a ton of conversation about this. It's gotten even more complicated because we have people like grants managers who can work at Stanford, but here, and receive California level pay. So there is a ton of conversation going about this because, we talked about project managers or program managers as part of the 2030 recommendations. But, I was talking with Toddy Steelman about, a program manager for one of the climate initiative pillars. And I think they got 0 applications. It's not it's just such a competitive landscape. So this is something that Daniel and team are thinking about really, really carefully, because I agree with you. We got to think about how we're going to navigate that. With Vic, your question, you're probably aware that, we have the search going on now for the vice provost for learning innovation. And that actually builds on the kind of vision you're talking about, which is what is not only what is learning beyond the walls of Duke mean, but also what does lifelong learning mean? Do we have students who start here that are going to continue taking, Duke courses and engaging in Duke offerings, throughout their whole lifetime? So And let me come back to Daniel's comment about increasing revenue. This is, a really robust enterprise here with what hybrid, online, et cetera, opportunities look like. Done right, could really help shore up our programs that are on campus. And this is, we've got 9 outstanding, finalists that are coming in to interview. And I really hope there's someone who's going to help drive this. So you're right. But yes, sort of Duke reaching out beyond the walls is definitely a part of what we're thinking about going forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Sally. And I expect that we'll hear more over the course of, the next year on the progress that's being made. And if anyone on Academic Council has additional questions, you can send them to our email at acouncil@duke.edu, and we'll forward them on to the appropriate people, Sally, especially regarding these working groups. With that, our next meeting will be on March 17th, which is also considered the annual faculty meeting, and that will include an address from President Price. Our intention is to be in person at that meeting, so I'm looking forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you for joining today, and with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Thanks.
Bye. All.